Hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation on the One Health approach to the management of future zoonotic diseases in the UK. In this presentation, I will be giving an overview of pandemics in the past and future. I will be linking how the effects of climate change will impact emerging infectious diseases. This will follow on to a special focus on dengue, whether this is a cause for concern and what should be done to monitor and intervene this disease if it comes to the UK. Next, I will be talking about how there should be a shift in the One Health approach to address climate change and zoonotic diseases. Lastly, I will lay out actual policy recommendations. Here I've given three definitions to clear up the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic, and what an emerging infectious disease is. So, an epidemic is when cases of an illness are contained to one region. For instance, the dengue virus, which is endemic in a lot of countries in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. Whereas a pandemic covers a wide area while affecting many people, such as COVID-19. Emerging infectious diseases are newly recognized diseases in a population but are rapidly increasing. It is important to recognize that the next pandemic is a question of when, not if. And according to a study done by Morani in 2021, there is a 17% chance of another pandemic occurring within our own lifetime. The risk of this is projected to increase by 44% over the next few decades. This equates to a 2% chance of a pandemic occurring each year. Already, the director of the Worldwide Influenza Center at the Francis Crick Institute claims that influenza will be the next most likely known disease to cause a pandemic. I've attached a link at the end of these slides to learn more about this. Firstly, looking to the past. This is a timeline of the pandemics throughout history, with the size of the circle corresponding to the death toll. In the past, pandemics typically arose from environmental exposure. For example, 200 years ago, a water pump in England led to a cholera outbreak killing around 40,000 people. This is no longer the case in developed countries as sanitation standards have increased. However, recent epidemic and pandemic trends have stemmed from zoonotic pathogens, the most recent case being a spillover event with COVID-19. This diagram explains how a virus like SARS-CoV-2 was able to cross a species barrier through various mutations and jump to humans. It underwent adaptations to become highly virulent and spread globally through international travel to reach the pandemic status. SARS-CoV-2 was previously classed as pathogen X. This name refers to the next possible disease to cause a pandemic. In June 2024, researchers narrowed down the top 30 viral families capable of becoming the next pathogen X. This focuses research and investment to these diseases, including the development of antivirals or vaccines to help alleviate symptoms or mitigate the spread. Spotlighted on this list was dengue, which is one of the top-ranking emerging infectious disease concerns globally. Dengue, also known as the bone break fever owing to its symptoms of painful muscle and joint pain, is an arboviral infection commonly transmitted by mosquito vector. It causes a range of symptoms from mild illness to dengue hemorrhagic fever and shock. This is a rapidly escalating disease. 2024 saw the largest dengue outbreak ever, with more than 40 million cases and 10,000 deaths. The year before saw a five-fold increase in the number of cases compared to 2022. Currently, this virus puts over half of the world's population at risk of contracting dengue. By 2050, this number is expected to rise and put 500,000 more people at risk. As you can see in the news and research, dengue outbreaks are increasing year by year and for longer periods of time. Currently, there are no treatments or vaccines providing complete protection for seronegative individuals. Dengue has 4 serotypes, and individuals can experience multiple infections with different serotypes. If a person has been vaccinated without prior exposure to the virus, antibody-dependent enhancement can increase the severity of a subsequent infection, leading to a higher viral load and a more severe form of dengue. The Qdenga vaccine, which is only partially effective against 2 of the 4 dengue serotypes, is not recommended for UK residents who have not been previously infected with the virus due to the risk of ADE. Ultimately, this has made the development of a safe and effective vaccine very difficult. Severe dengue occurs in just under 5% of patients, with a mortality rate of less than 1%. While this may seem low compared to a disease like COVID, dengue epidemics have serious economic implications, which I will detail later. Moving on to why dengue rates are increasing. Current research is suggesting climate change is playing a crucial role in the increased outbreaks of vector-borne diseases such as dengue. WHO has already acknowledged the link between climate change and the fatal effects it has on global health since the 1990s. There are many different factors associated with it that impact pathogens. This spans from vector-borne, foodborne, or waterborne pathogens, which denotes their transmission type. Last year, there was a study done by Mora which found that over half of the human pathogens they tested were aggravated by climatic hazards. As you can see, this diagram details how the different effects of climate change can impact diseases based on their mode of transition. It is extremely interconnected with effects such as increased temperature, extended seasons, and different weather patterns affecting the different disease types. Already, we're seeing an increase in areas suitable for different infections, such as the West Nile virus, a vector-borne disease. In this presentation, I will focus more on how climate change will impact dengue. As I previously mentioned, dengue is a vector-borne disease and is transmitted to humans via the arthropod mosquito. One of the different consequences of climate change, increased temperature, can affect this disease in 3 different ways: through dengue transmission, the mosquito vector, and the virus itself. Firstly, dengue transmission. This diagram details the baseline and future mosquito populations by season in 23 geographic areas around the US of varying climates. In the map, the inner circle represents the projected future mosquito populations, and the larger circle is the current population of tiger mosquitoes. As you can see, transmission rates will get a lot worse in the summer due to the longer extrinsic incubation period of the virus. Therefore, as temperatures increase, there will be a longer period for dengue transmission around the world. Moving on to how rising global temperatures can also affect the dengue vector. The Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus tiger mosquito are 2 dengue vectors. As explained above, when temperature increases, so do the transmission rates. This is because the optimum temperature for transmission is around the mid to high 20s. But at the same time, if the temperature increase supersedes 36 degrees Celsius, the mortality of the albopictus mosquito increases. This will be a driving factor in the mosquito's geographic spread. One study even found that a higher temperature shortens the gonotrophic cycle of the mosquito, so it will have even more frequent blood feedings, meaning it can infect even more people. Lastly, moving on to how the virus itself is affected by climate change. The dengue virus can undergo mutations which can be exacerbated by increased temperature when adapting to a new environment. Genome analysis has shown that higher temperatures can cause the virus to mutate. This enhances its severity, which can lead to heart or kidney damage. And recent studies have shown that higher temperatures shorten the extrinsic incubation period for the virus particle, which increases viral transmission due to its shorter maturation cycle. This enables it to readily infect humans at a higher rate. So, what is happening with dengue currently? The virus is endemic to predominantly tropic and subtropic regions. However, the tiger mosquito is starting to establish itself in a large part of Western Europe, including Italy and France, by moving from the equator to the poles. While fatality rates would be relatively low, there are other consequences to consider, such as the economic burden which is already being seen around the world. The World Economic Forum has estimated that climate change could cost the world $12.5 trillion by 2050. This would be due to infrastructure losses from wildfires, floods, and extra costs on the healthcare system from medical and staffing costs. The estimated annual cost for dengue globally is around $8.9 billion. This is attributed to the surveillance and prevention of dengue, as well as disease diagnosis and treatment of patients. Additionally, government agencies are starting to monitor the cost of productivity losses in the workplace due to dengue infections and post-dengue fatigue syndrome, which 60% of infected patients suffer from. Although this data is limited and varies, it is dependent on the country's infrastructure to record it. Additionally, infections can be asymptomatic, whereby the majority of cases are not recorded. So, what is the UK doing to monitor the threat of dengue currently? The transmission of dengue in the UK is dependent on two factors: the presence of infected humans and the presence of competent mosquito vectors. So, the vector has already been found in the UK at travel ports. However, it's not established itself yet because the UK's climate is currently unsuitable. There have been cases of infected humans coming to the UK through travel. However, there are no measures in place to prevent potentially dengue-infected humans travelling to the UK. While there is no current evidence of local transmission, it is projected to change from global warming as the UK becomes more suitable for vector reproduction during the winter. Well, how could dengue be stopped from coming to the UK? Addressing the causes of climate change would be instrumental. It has been estimated that if the Paris Climate Agreement objective of limiting the global average temperature increase to within 1.5 degrees, then by the year 2050, the number of dengue cases could decrease by 300,000 globally. This would continue to decrease by 500,000 cases in the year 2100. Therefore, addressing climate change would serve as an important mitigation technique to the threat of dengue. So, over the past few decades, there has been a substantial amount of evidence on how addressing climate change would mitigate zoonotic diseases from coming to the UK. In particular, a recent study projects that most of England will become suitable for the establishment of the vector by the 2060s. 10 years after this, Wales and Northern Ireland will become suitable for the mosquito to establish. The diagram on this slide shows the future suitability of the UK for Aedes albopictus mosquitoes to establish themselves from 2060 to 2090. The top row of maps show the gradual suitability for the vector from moderate emissions with mitigation efforts in the UK, while the bottom row of maps show a gradual suitability from high emissions without significant mitigation efforts. Therefore, highlighting directly how greenhouse gas mitigation efforts would significantly decrease the suitability of the dengue vector remaining in the UK, meaning it could slow the possibility for local transmission of dengue to occur. This could impact UK tourists in the near future visiting from Italy and France, for example, as they could contract dengue while abroad, and upon returning to the UK, they could have the virus present in their blood. With the projected rise in temperatures in the UK, the environment will become more hospitable to the mosquito vector, potentially enabling local transmission. As a result, there is a risk that the disease could establish itself within the UK and become endemic. Now, looking ahead to how else the UK could mitigate the establishment of dengue. The One Health approach addresses the links between the health of humans, animals, and ecosystems to improve global health. The World Health Organization with the UN set this up to encourage collaboration across different sectors and countries to address challenges and gaps in global health. The UK so far has released 3 reports on the One Health approach focused on antibiotic resistance in humans, animals, and food. Currently, there are increasing efforts to cover zoonotic diseases, but they focus more on surveilling influenza and rabies. So, a modified One Health approach could lead to a more integrated strategy to combat climate change and the potential of pandemic-causing pathogens, in particular, vector-borne diseases such as dengue. It will enable the UK to concentrate their efforts into prioritising future risks to public health. By raising awareness in the political and public space, it will allow resources to be allocated, enabling a multifaceted response to a future dengue epidemic in the UK. To really drive home my point, when it comes to dengue, prevention is key. This slide outlines the policy recommendations to include in the One Health approach to mitigate dengue becoming endemic. To start, continual surveillance of the tiger albopictus mosquitoes at airports and ports would be required, as well as recording human cases coming to the UK. These would be shared in collaboration with other European health centres to estimate the timeline of locally acquired cases in the UK and track mutation rates. This would inform investment choices into vaccine development for different dengue serotypes. Additionally, an emphasis on incorporating data from climate models of the UK into dengue surveillance could really help to create a more accurate early warning system. while at the same time putting increasing pressure on the government to further decrease our carbon emissions. The UK is a giant in the biotechnology industry. However, we need to increase investment into vaccine development, which is low at the moment given its threat. Lastly, there have been huge advances in genetically modifying the dengue vector, called Oxitec GM mosquitoes. This could help to control the spread of the disease carrying mosquitoes and limit the rate of transmission by allowing GM mosquitoes to carry and pass on a self-limiting gene to wild-type mosquitoes. This would be particularly relevant in the future before cases reach an epidemic status. I will leave a link in the last slide where you can find further information on this. So, what would a One Health approach using genomic surveillance look like? This example diagram is a simplified version of what the French National Reference Centres implemented. It shows how collecting samples from individuals with the symptoms listed here and are coming from dengue endemic areas such as the Caribbean or Central America can then be genotyped. The dengue virus's genomic sequence data can be shared on an established international data platform such as the VIPR database while looking for the emergence of mutations in dengue. Already, the French Centre has found resistant genes to mosnodenvir, an antiviral agent against dengue, which is still in clinical trials. This is feasible in the UK because the NHS, in collaboration with Oxford Nanopore, has already rolled out genetic testing on patients with respiratory illnesses at over 30 sites. This was set up to look for the next pandemic. However, there are limitations to setting up projection models. For example, there are data gaps, meaning a dengue outbreak prediction model for one region could not be applied to different areas due to varied climatic factors, e.g. coastal regions versus metropolitan areas. Additional data shortages include the limited availability of different climate factors on dengue cases on a micro level such as a city. This would affect the timescale. Current limited understanding of non-climatic factors on dengue would further complicate the surveillance system, such as socio-demographic components like population density and access to healthcare. While there is a lot known on the relationship between dengue and climate change, in particular the increase in temperature, there is still not enough research into how rainfall and humidity affects this virus. As these factors will increase with climate change, it is important to focus research efforts onto these areas. Lastly, as the dengue virus is hard to eradicate and therefore needs to be prevented, developing policies on both climate change and public health is required to prevent the UK from becoming habitable for the dengue virus. However, implementing policies in a timely manner remains a major limitation. To summarise, I have outlined the intrinsic relationship between climate change and emerging infectious diseases. I have talked about how the One Health approach could be altered to integrate zoonotic diseases and how climate change will make the UK more suitable for incoming EIDs. Following this, I have given actionable recommendations such as investing in a more accurate surveillance system and sharing data on a global scale which could help with dengue projection models. Additionally, the need to prioritise climate and disease mitigation to reduce future health risks to the UK public, in particular the dengue virus. Finally, I want to emphasise how policies need to be developed and enacted now in order to prevent dengue from establishing in the UK. Thank you so much for your time, and please find links on the last slide to learn more.